47 seconds. That is how long Pete Hegseth sat completely still after Senator Jack Reed placed the cost estimate on the table, not the $5 billion figure his department had offered at the beginning of the conflict, not the $25 billion figure he had testified to 12 days earlier, a different number, a number that had grown by $4 billion in less than 2 weeks and was still climbing. When Reed asked him to explain what was not included in that number, what costs his department had quietly left out of every estimate it had given Congress, Hegseth had no answer that could survive the follow-up question. This was not one senator asking one question. This was a full Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Pete Hegseth, General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and a room full of senators who had spent weeks being told the war was going exactly as planned, the costs were under control, the mission was succeeding, and the enemy had been devastated. None of those things turned out to be accurate. And Tuesday's hearing was where the gap between what the administration had been saying and what the documents actually showed became impossible to maintain in public. Here is exactly what happened. The hearing had been scheduled as a budget review, supplemental appropriations request, the kind of proceeding that generates coverage of spreadsheets and line items rather than the questions that have been building for weeks. Hegseth arrived with prepared remarks about operational success, strategic objectives, and the historical necessity of confronting Iran. General Kane arrived with the measured bearing of a career military officer who has testified before Congress many times and knows how to give answers that technically respond to questions without actually answering them. What neither of them had prepared for was the specific, sequential, documented nature of what was waiting for them. The first hour was almost routine. Then Jack Reed took the microphone. Secretary Hegseth, Reed said, his voice carrying the flat precision of a former Army Ranger who has spent 2 decades on this committee. On April 29th, you testified before this committee that the total cost of Operation Epic Fury and Operation Freedom's Edge was $25 billion. You reaffirmed that figure this morning in your opening statement. I want to give you the opportunity to update that number right now. Hegseth leaned forward slightly. Senator, our operational cost estimate as of this morning is $29 billion. The increase reflects updated repair and replacement costs for equipment and general operational costs for maintaining forces in theater. Reed looked at him. That is a $4 billion increase in 12 days. Senator, these estimates are refined continuously as. What is not in the $29 billion? Reed asked. His voice hadn't changed register. Just the question. Your department confirmed this morning that installation damage, bases that have been hit, infrastructure that has been destroyed, is not included in the estimate. Is that correct? 4 seconds. That is correct, Senator. We do not have a reliable estimate for facility reconstruction at this time because we don't yet know what percentage our allies and partners will contribute. So the $29 billion does not include the cost of rebuilding bases. That is correct. Does it include the cost of weapons transferred to partner nations in the region? Hegseth looked at General Kane. Kane looked at his notes. I would want to verify that figure to make sure it's accurate. Reed set the document down. You are asking this committee for a $1.5 trillion defense budget. You cannot tell us whether the weapons we gave away are counted in your cost estimate. You cannot tell us what it will cost to rebuild the bases. And the number you gave us 12 days ago has already increased by $4 billion. He paused. What is the actual cost of this war, Secretary Hegseth? 47 seconds of silence. Every camera in the room repositioned. 3 Republican members who had spent the morning supporting the budget request were now studying their own papers with considerable focus. Because 47 seconds of silence from a Secretary of Defense when asked the total cost of an act of war is not a classification concern. It is not a procedural question. It is the sound of someone who does not have a number they are willing to say out loud. But Reed was only the beginning. Senator Chris Murphy took the microphone next. He had a different document, an intelligence assessment that had been circulating outside the administration's official narrative for 2 weeks. General Kane, Murphy said. The president stated publicly last week that Iran has approximately 18 to 19% of its missile capability remaining. That would mean we destroyed over 80% of their missile and drone arsenal. Is that accurate? Kane's response was careful. Senator, I'm not going to comment in this forum on battle damage assessment or intelligence community estimates. So you won't confirm the president's statement? I won't comment on BDA in an open setting. Murphy looked at him. Public reporting based on intelligence assessments suggests Iran still has approximately 70% of its missile and drone capability. If that is accurate, we have not achieved our stated military objective. Can you confirm or deny that figure? I have not read the report you are referencing, and I will not validate or deny leaked intelligence in this forum. Murphy turned to Hegseth. Mr. Secretary, the president said 80% destroyed. Outside reporting says 30% destroyed. The stated mission was to eliminate Iran's ability to threaten the region. How does this committee assess whether to continue funding an operation if you will not tell us whether the mission is succeeding? Hegseth's answer was the answer that would define the hearing. We don't talk about those things here. You like to talk about them on TV. We don't talk about them here. The room went quiet. Not the quiet of people waiting for more information. The quiet of people who have just heard a Secretary of Defense tell a Senate Oversight Committee that its questions are not worth answering. Then Lindsey Graham stood up. And the moment Lindsey Graham, a Republican, a Trump supporter, a man who has defended this administration on more issues than almost any other senator, stood up and said what he said, the entire temperature of the room shifted. I'll be honest with you. Graham said, and his voice had the specific quality of someone who has been holding something back for a long time and has decided to stop. I don't trust Pakistan. I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. He paused. If Iran is parking reconnaissance aircraft at Pakistani air bases to protect their assets. And there are reports suggesting exactly that. Then we are negotiating through a mediator who is simultaneously hosting the other side's military assets. That is not a neutral mediator. And this, he gestured broadly at the witness table, is why this damn thing is going nowhere. The chamber went silent. Not because Graham had said something nobody was thinking, because Graham had said out loud what everyone in that room had been thinking and nobody on the Republican side had been willing to say. Senator Dick Durbin took the quiet that followed and used it. General Kane, Durbin said, we have spent approximately $1 trillion on defense in each of the last 2 years. I want to ask you a simple question. How is it that after $1 trillion in defense spending, Iran is able to close the Strait of Hormuz using small boats and drones? Kane's answer was the answer that $1 trillion had apparently purchased. Senator, it's a complex situation. There are a lot of different small boats. Some of this is on the commercial traffickers. The core problem is Iran holding the global economy hostage through the strait. Durbin looked at him, so the answer is that it's complicated. My concern is that we are here today being asked for $1.5 trillion, and the last $1 trillion produced a situation where a country with a fraction of our defense budget is holding the world's most critical oil shipping lane hostage with small boats. He paused. Why should this committee give you more money? No answer came that addressed the question. Senator Chris Coons pressed on NATO. Hegseth had spent months publicly criticizing America's European allies. Their spending, their commitment, their reliability. Coons had a simple question. Secretary Hegseth, you served in Afghanistan. You know those battlefields. Did NATO allies fight and die alongside American forces in Afghanistan? Hegseth's answer, the vast majority of my experience was frustration with the limits of what those troops were able to do because of political caveats and rules of engagement. That is not what I asked, Coons said. I asked whether they fought and died alongside us. Because approximately 1/3 of all combat casualties in Afghanistan were NATO partners and allies, hundreds of service members from the UK, Australia, Canada, and other nations. I am asking whether you acknowledge that fact. Hegseth said he would take Coons' word for the number. The Secretary of Defense of the United States, a man who served in Afghanistan, said he would take the senator's word for how many Allied soldiers died in the same war. Senator Patty Murray delivered the final accounting. You are asking American taxpayers for $1.5 trillion. Americans are paying $4, $5, $6 a gallon for gas because of this war. Medicare and Medicaid are being cut. Child care funding is being eliminated. The president himself said, we're fighting wars. We cannot take care of daycare. Secretary Hegseth, Is it your position that American families should give up their health coverage and child care so that you can have $1.5 trillion for this budget? Hegseth's answer: that's not my department. The Secretary of Defense, asked whether American families should lose their health care to pay for a war he is running, said it was not his department. By the time the chairman ended the hearing, cutting off multiple senators who still had questions, telling the room there was no time for a second round, 5 things had been established on the public record that no amount of subsequent spin could erase. The war has cost $29 billion so far, and the number does not include bases, certain weapons transfers, or reconstruction costs. Iran still has somewhere between 30 and 70% of its missile and drone capability intact, depending on whose numbers you believe, and the administration refused to say whose numbers are right. Pakistan, the designated neutral mediator, may be hosting Iranian military aircraft at its bases. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed to commercial traffic despite $1 trillion in annual defense spending. And the Secretary of Defense, when asked the cost of the war, the success of the mission, the sacrifice of Allied soldiers, and the burden on American families, answered with some variation of "that is not my department. I won't discuss that here, or I would need to check that number." Lindsey Graham called it correctly. This damn thing is going nowhere. And Tuesday's hearing put every word of that assessment into the permanent congressional record. But here is what the summary alone cannot capture: what it felt like to be in that room when Lindsey Graham said what he said. Congressional hearings have a predictable partisan rhythm. Republicans defend, Democrats attack, the witness deflects. The cycle repeats. That rhythm creates a kind of noise that drowns out the moments when something genuinely unexpected happens. When Graham stood up and said this damn thing is going nowhere, the rhythm stopped.